And welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I'm your host, Callahan, and this is the third part. We had to break this up into 3 episodes of our cEDH tier list. We have a great show lined up for you. Lots of interesting stuff to talk about. But before we get into it, I just want to thank you all for joining us this week. If you like this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. And if you want to help keep the lights on around here and keep me fed, go to the Patreon down in the description or at patreon.com/mindsculptors and check out that link and try and support the channel. Really appreciate that. Joining us again this week is our good friend Ryan from Playing with Power. Ryan, how you doing?
Ready for part 3. Let's do it.
We really milked this one, didn't we?
Gotta get that engagement up. Gotta get those clicks, baby.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you again for joining us. It's been a pleasure, absolutely. And also joining us today, again, the Canadian himself, the Frenchman, as I said in the first episode, is Pongo. Pongo, how you doing?
Omelette du fromage. But in all seriousness, I'm doing fantastically. I'm glad to be back, and it's interesting seeing the sort of uncontrolled scope creep of these episodes.
Yeah, it's getting crazy.
I think just looking at the list, we could easily do more. I'm confident we'll finish this time.
Yeah.
But, that people, we apologize in advance. There will be some commanders we don't talk about.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is. But starting us off for this week's episode and dive into it is we're going to take a look at Sisay Weatherlight Captain. This is a deck that Rebel has been championing for quite some time. You gave it an F last year. Have you softened up to it at all?
So, Sisay Weatherlight Captain, 5-color commander. It's basically you just cast a Jeweled Lotus and get into it. So Rebel is one of the kind of prolific pilots of it right now that's been championing the build of it. Uses the Giganta, the Wellspring companion kind of thing with it. And it, for lack of a better word, it wins with Najeela. And the first question I always ask when I look at the combo line is, why don't I just play Najeela? And so that's kind of the question I always present to myself when somebody has a win con that involves something that could be in your command zone. Like I see, there's times when I see decks that run Urza, Lord High Artificer, as one of the win cons in its deck. And I'm like, why don't I just play Urza? And so this suffers the same problem. So I could take all of these extra steps to try and make the Najeela thing work. I can tutor, I can get Giganta out, or maybe, I can sneak attack it in or something like that. Oh, isn't that cute and stuff like that? And that's fine. I think that our world is okay with having these types of decks in them. That being said, the card quality in this deck, because of how you have to build it, is just not great. You don't get to run, contrary to popular belief, the best cards in the format because it's 5 colors. You run certain things that complement your lines, and you also have to run things that allow you to run Giganta in the companion zone, if you will. So you don't get the argument of 5-color plays the best, because you can't do that with this one. It's really novel. Sometimes people like to have their personality shine through in decks. And this definitely is one of those decks that has it has that novel feel to it. Hey, check it out. Look what I did. And I pulled it off. Isn't that cool? And you're like, yeah, that was really cool. That was really neat. But what it does at the end of the day and what you can do with it at the end of the day is really not that much better than my opinion last year. The Giganta thing helped it, but it didn't help it much. So I'm going to give it an E. It's not an F anymore. I think Rebel did enough work to it to push it out of the, don't play this, it's unplayable range. But it's still not don't expect to win your next tournament with it, unless you're Rebel, who plays it a lot, So that's my opinion. So
okay.
E.
Pongo, you gave it a D last year. What do you think?
I think, again, Ryan raises some very good points as usual. last year I gave it a D tier, and I'm sorry, I'm just like stalling for time because I know that Rebel is currently listening. Rebel probably skipped this to this point.
Yep.
Like straight away. So I just need to take as much time as I can to just like not give the rating. We love you, Rebel. So I am going to take a moment to sort of do a little bit of analysis and to kind of expand upon Ryan's points and also, delay as much as possible.
Gotta get that listen time up, baby.
Keep that engagement time up, baby. Keep it up. Let me tell you about the history of Sisay.
Yeah, exactly.
Sisay when I was a kid.
So it started in Urza's saga.
So one thing I will say about Sisay Weatherlight Captain, kind of to contrast it with Najeela, obviously the deck kind of has issues. It is a 5-color deck, but sacrifices card quality, as you pointed out, Ryan, to have Gigantha in the command zone. Giving up obvious staples like Thassa's Oracle, and ad nauseum, sort of most notably. But what you get in exchange is sort of like a bit of that Godo effect, where the deck takes a much greater advantage of fast mana than Najeela does. Because, Najeela is sort of more reliant on being able to make Wooburg consistently, whereas Gigantha is doing the heavy lifting of making the Wooburg for you in Sisay. So, you get to play things like Jeska's Will to make a ton of mana and to run out your Gigantha. You have all that in the command zone. Which I think is very powerful, sort of as Godo illustrates very, very well. Where the deck kind of runs into some issues, I think, is that it kind of you have to put Gigantha into play most of the time and then pass the turn. So it's not as clear of a comparison to Godo as, it seems at first blush. Obviously, they're both, funnily enough, counting to 11 because Gigantha's 5 mana, but then 3 mana with the tax, and then Sisay's 3 mana. So, 5 + 3 + 3 is 11. But then you're also generally waiting a turn with Sisay. There's ways around that in the deck. And I think that, if you have those, that's great. But it's still a lot of mana, and you're not getting that immediate benefit of winning right on the spot with it a lot of the time. So that's kind of a strike against it. And I think beyond that, Sisay's kind of having a bit of a identity crisis recently, where, I think Rebel's initial builds were kind of all in on being very, very fast and putting Gigantha into play. And I think that probably works better in a world where you don't have to pay an additional 3 mana for Gigantha. And I think Rebel probably agrees that, all the timing issues and then, the pretty steep mana investment kind of puts you in a position where you're not really out racing dedicated fast decks. You're not really racing decks like even Godo that just only need to get to the 11 mana. And you're not really building the deck that way either anymore. So now that the deck tends to play, a couple more stacks pieces and stuff like that. So that kind of slows down the game plan a little bit. And Sisay kind of has this issue that I think a lot of, even Najeela would have this issue if you build her in a stacks direction, where if you're trying to play that game plan, you're a lot of the time putting yourself in this position where, decks that can't win necessarily through your hate pieces will oftentimes have better grind plans in the command zone than you do. So it can be tough for you to follow up your disruptive plan with additional disruption, to keep laying out pieces that are going to maintain your soft lock on the game or protect your soft lock on the game. And I think Sisay does have that issue to some extent. One thing I will say that sort of has worked out in Sisay's favor is that we keep getting new legendary cards that are better. Obviously, this is a deck that is really happy to have Ragavan, and I think any deck that's really happy to have Ragavan is cool in my books. Additionally, we get new sort of more efficient legendary creatures all the time that make it so that Sisay can kind of come out and be a little bit bigger right out of the gate, and kind of play a little bit better along the value axis, or sort of not necessarily require quite as much to get rolling, because that's another issue with Lavinia too, right? Is that you do need to have her be big enough to kind of get the plan going. Mm-hmm. It's not as trivial as just having, like Giganthan.
You mean Sisay, not Lavinia?
Sorry, yeah, exactly.
Your biases are bleeding.
Yeah. All that being said, I think that the deck is certainly capable of competing against, your average cEDH deck. I think that the card quality, generally speaking, is still good enough. I think that legendary creatures, the package that it's playing now, has improved considerably since the inception of the deck. I'm comfortable bumping this up to a C.
Okay, nice.
And Rebel, you can DM me after for my address if you want to mail me the money. It's fine.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'd like to change my answer. S tier. Make checks out to cash.
So Ryan, you said something interesting about if you're playing Najeela in the deck, why don't you just play Najeela? And one of the things that I keep thinking about is, if I was given the choice to build a deck with stacks in it, would I rather play Najeela or Sisay? I would personally rather pick Sisay. Because of its ability to pivot into this grindy stacks game plan with its commander, where it can get out stuff like Lavinia, get out stuff like Oko, Karn. It can get out Thalia, and it plays Vryn Ringmare, and then it plays all these other like artifact, hate pieces like Trinisphere, Thorn, and then like Rest in Peace, Deafening Silence. I think that this is a more compelling shell to build that type of deck in it. I don't know that I would classify this as a stacks deck, but generally speaking, like Deafening Silence and Najeela decks, I'm like, on. I don't really find those that terribly compelling to play. And I don't really think taxing effects are that compelling to play in Najeela, but I think in this, it makes a lot of sense because the ability and your win condition is all based around this activated ability, right? So you weren't super worried about the taxing effect that you're putting onto the board because, well, I'm not really casting my spells, right? I'm searching them up and putting them onto the battlefield. So that would be kind of my argument against that, because I do think there is a reason to play this over Najeela if you want to play something that isn't just Najeela turn sideways and then play tempo after that. And I think that's perfectly fine. Overall, where I think it lands, I don't really disagree with Pongo on anything on that front. I think it's a pretty solid C tier commander to me. I think last year I put it at E because I was way over evaluating. I thought Opposition Agent was going to be the menace, not Hull Breacher. I got to be honest. And so I was assuming that Opposition Agent would just make these decks unplayable, right? And it certainly causes a hiccup to them, right? But I don't see these decks unable to function and unable to perform around them. So I think it's a fine C tier commander. I don't mind bumping it up from an E at all. So that's kind of my whole 2 cents on it. Next up, we're going to start getting into kind of the premier partners, I would say. And kicking it off is one of the newer ones from Commander Legends is Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator. And so, Ryan, last year you gave this a D, and it's done a lot of work in some tournaments. What do you think about it now?
So basically, the place where you see Malcolm is in Malcolm Tana. And essentially, you have this Teamer Malcolm Pirates, build that you neoform into a Glenhorn Buccaneer. You have one half of your combo in the command zone because then you just go infinite and you win the game. And it creates a lot of consistency because Teamer is in really good colors to be able to tutor up creatures. So the fact that you have one half in the command zone, that half is also a mana generation engine in the command zone. It's blue, which is a fantastic color in our format, all makes it really, really good. When we first rated this, it was still really new. People really hadn't figured out some of the things you could do with it yet. And it's come a long way since then. I have seen this win one of our tournaments on our Discord. So one of the PWP tournaments. I have seen it put down really good numbers at other tournaments. It's really good. It's a lot better than I had originally given it credit for. Is it, S tier? No, I wouldn't say that it's that. I would probably put it into a B tier. I think it's better than some stuff that's out there. I know that, it's hard to do it in isolation because you don't just play a single partner. I am evaluating this based upon the fact that it's Teamer Malcolm and it's Teamer Pirates. That is the Malcolm that we're talking about here, not it's like some people are playing Malcolm Breaches and stuff like that, but mana generation on a really good color, evasion to be able to connect is really good. So some people are playing Malcolm Tymna's out there and putting good numbers in with it. So I think it's a solid B tier. I think it's a good card, and I think that's where I think it is.
Pongo, you gave it an F last year. Pretty sure that was a meme. But in your honest opinion, now here in 2021, what do you think of Malcolm? We've seen a full, season with it in MLC. We've seen it do pretty well. We've seen it win some tournaments. What do you think of it?
Yeah, so like with a lot of the other sort of monocolor partners, I'm going to rate this based on what I feel like are the strongest possible pairings that you can have with this commander. I think that this is an A tier commander. I think that kind of just getting to play like the Grixis shell with a commander that gives you a little bit of mana is sufficient to remain in the A tier. In addition, you just also kind of get this one card win condition, which, as I was talking about before, when you're incidentally playing Thassa's Oracle with Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact stuff going on, being able to convert those tutors into your one card win condition is very, very powerful. I had pointed that out initially for like the food chain style decks, and it's even more deterministic here, where you just go for your Glenhorn Buccaneer. I think also that the rug combination, so like Malcolm plus Tana, is also very powerful. That's bolstered by the fact that, not that you have necessarily like the best 98, not necessarily that, you have a great second commander. Although I suppose you could say the same thing for Vile Smasher. It's bolstered, I think, by the fact that a one card creature based win condition in Rug is, about as good as you could ask for, honestly. And naturally,
that also generates mana too.
Right, exactly. You also just played a pretty valuable 3-mana commander in and of itself. I think that, that part of Malcolm shouldn't be undersold. It's not like producing card advantage necessarily, but it is producing some advantage. And I think that, I do need to rate it both as having decent access to colors, or I should say 3 ways. It has decent access to colors. I would say, even good access to colors. It is an outlet for a one card win condition in the command zone, and it does provide some form of value. I think that the form of value it provides is potentially a little bit weaker in some cases, stronger in other cases, but by my estimation is totally fine for a card that also has like that checks the 2 other boxes to at least get into the A tier.
Right. That makes sense to me. I had this interesting, I gave it a C last year, and I don't remember if I said this last year or not, but I feel like it's in like theory, right? The best partner pair for it in partners across, like, I think like the best partner pairings in like the abstract, right, would be Malcolm Tymna, because you got your card advantage generation and your mana generation both in the command zone. Granted, there's a lot of other stuff that plays into that, but like in the theory world, they're like the ideal partner pairing. And basically what it comes down to for me with this is I think the more I look at the stuff that's getting printed, they keep putting pirate on everything, right? So it's one of those things where it just feels like it's going to continually get better. So I think I'm going to probably say, man, I don't know where I want to put this. I don't know that I quite agree. Man, I'm going to say A tier. I think I agree more with Pongo on that rating. It's low A, high B for me, if I'm being honest.
I mean, like, let me put it this way. Like, what is Najeela's biggest strength other than being a 5-color commander?
That she can win the game on her own.
It's the access to 1-card win conditions. I think 1 card, like undervaluing the power of 1-card win conditions, you know, it's something that that is easy enough to do, but in practice ends up being so powerful. Just
right.
Like being able to convert any tutor into your win condition, like kind of always having a clear line for how you plan on closing out the game. You know, it's powerful to have a linear game plan that you can fall back on, to take off some of the cognitive load, you know, on the one hand of kind of having to, you know, navigate a complex game to the point where you can win. But in addition, you know, it just also has like clear, tangible advantages in terms of like converting cards into a win. Like,
right.
It's not just a question of the cognitive load. It's not just a question of linearity, like how much easier it is to pull off. You know, like all of those things have benefits from a cognitive perspective, but they have clear benefits from a gameplay perspective as well.
Right. Yeah, I think that's all really fair. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for me. With that being said, moving on to the next partner from Commander Legends that's on our list is Rograkh, son of Rohgahh. This has made some splashes, Ryan, and you gave it an A last year. What do you think? Do you think it's an A? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse?
So Rograkh, son of Rohgahh, is one of the most unique abilities we have seen in the command zone. And boy, I can't even tell you how long. It's zero, having access to a 0-drop all the time. That's a creature, is exactly what turned people onto this card. Like, oh, and everyone gives the kind of the quintessential reasons why Rograkh is so great. Oh, my Mox Amber becomes a Mox Ruby. My, you know, culling ritual. I don't need another creature. And, you know, all of these things, you know, my diabolic intent becomes a demonic tutor. And those are all great. And a lot of people argue that Roger Silas is the fastest deck in the format. Like consistently, like even in the Red Love Discord where people say, oh, you know, Godo is the fastest. Like, no, he's not. Godo is not the fastest deck in the format. It's Roger Silas is the fastest. Consistently putting down turn 1 wins. It does it all the time. It becomes the kind of the threat because of the access of Roger in the command zone. The thing is that Roger Silas, and where you normally see Roger is in the Roger Silas build, doesn't have a whole lot of rebound. It doesn't have a whole lot of resiliency. Like, if you were playing a Grixis Turbo Naws commander, usually The ones that you see that have the most resiliency through things like interaction are things like Tevish Kraum, for example. That's always my quintessential one. You can power out your Tevish or power out your Kraum, rebuild very quickly. But Roger, he makes some of your card quality a little bit better in the things that I had just mentioned, but he suffers from that rebound. So if you get interacted with, let's say you power out a turn 1 ad nauseum, and you do your thing, and then somebody just counters it. Let's say they Swan Song, or let's say they even have the Force of Will and you're going turn 1. And you're done. You're spent. It's taking you a lot longer to recover versus some of the other Grixis commanders that are out there. You powered out your ad nauseum, and then maybe you can try and recover a little bit better. What are you going to do? Cast Roger again? Okay. What are you doing with it other than it just sitting there? So it does suffer that fragility, that a little bit more glass cannon-y kind of feel. I was really high on it. I used to play Roger Silas until I realized that when everyone just knows to pack that T1 interaction because they know its speed, it kind of suffers a little bit for it. So that was a long-winded way of saying something that overall, it's not as good as I think it used to be. However, I don't think that actually bumps it down enough into a lower tier. It's still really unique. It's still really good. It's in a really good color in our format. I still think it belongs in A. We don't do high A's and low A's, but if we did, it went from a high A to a real low A for me. But I don't think it quite belongs in B.
Okay. Pongo, you and I gave it an S rating last year. Do you still think it's deserving of the S rating still?
Well, in earnest, I don't know that I ever thought it deserved an S rating. One thing I'll say, before moving on is, yes, I agree with a lot of what Ryan said. Sort of the one point of contention I have is that I wouldn't necessarily characterize Rograkh as being like a consistent turn 1 deck. I do think that of decks in this format, it is the one that wins on turn 1 the most often. But we can. I think ultimately I'm making like a semantics argument, right? And I don't want to get too much into that. But I do think that the turn 1 wins still represent like a pretty strong minority of its wins. It's just that very, very few decks in the format are remotely capable of winning on, or are capable of winning on turn 1, and then even then, like the small amount of them that can need very, very particular like hand compositions to do so. And Rograkh, obviously, if those are like 1 in 100 games for those other decks, I think Rograkh doesn't maybe 1 in every 20 games, maybe 1 in every 10 games if we're being like very generous, which is still impressive, like super impressive. But, I'm digressing a little bit. If we go back to my criteria, I think that Rograkh obviously has the colors that immediately, I think, in my mind, put it at least into a B tier based on what I talked about before. Blue, black plus either green or red is very, very strong. Of blue, black plus another color, I would just say almost certainly is going to get you into the B tier for me. In most cases. What else does Rograkh offer? Well, as Ryan said, Rograkh doesn't offer you really much in the way of card advantage or value or anything like that. So we have to look at my other category, which is combo enabler. And I think that it's most sensible. What makes the most sense is to think of Rograkh as a combo enabler. And he enables, quite literally ad nauseum strategies, right? And, we could also say he enables some other strategies with Cloudstone Curio and stuff like that. But, I think that those are probably weaker strategies for the most part than the ad nauseum based strategies. And so he enables those strategies by giving you access to way more fast mana way earlier than pretty much any other deck in the format does. So I think that it makes sense to look at him from that perspective, which means that he's checking at least 2 of those boxes. And I think he's checking 2 of those boxes well enough that I'm willing to give him an A. he's certainly not an S, and I don't think I don't really think I ever believed he was an S. It's just one of those things where you're within the Grixis colors, you're essentially kind of choosing, do I want like a faster goldfish versus the ability to be a little bit more resilient? And that's kind of where we're at with like the Grixis sort of like character select screen, so to speak. We have a lot of like kind of.
It's a really good analogy.
Yeah, choose your character.
We have a lot of like commander alternatives that are like fairly equivalent, I think, in terms of their effectiveness. And each kind of has like a certain strength or weakness or balance of strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I basically where I'm at with it is last year I did give it an earnest S because I thought that enabling the free interaction was going to be really tough to overcome. But playing against it, I'm just like, it's fine. Like it's explosive, but then you interact with it and then it just goes, oh, this was the deck that I was saying last week that Ian said something where it was just like, Roger Silas players kid themselves and tell themselves the lie that they play blue to interact because they really don't. And basically where it comes down to for me is I kind of fall in line with you guys on this. I think it's a solid A. And like you guys said, it enables the strong strategies. But if you don't get the nuts and you can't interact, then you don't have a whole lot to go from there. And one shell that I do think it's interesting in over Rog Silas is Rog Tymna. Just because Tymna does give you some backup in that regard. And I think that the Mardu WinCon packages have kind of gotten put into a point now where they're not insane. But, that's neither here nor there. But I do think it has some more versatility outside of just Silas. I think, Rograkh, Thrasios is a thing, Rograkh, Tymna is a thing, and I think they're all interesting. So it's worth exploring some more with that card, but I am not as high on it as I was last year. Next card on our list is the other Planeswalker partner from Commander Legends, Jeska Thrice Reborn. And this is a this is a card we've talked about before in the past in the last episode with the Shy. But it's also pretty big because of Mad Farm. It really made Mad Farm like a solid deck now. And so, Ryan, you gave this a C last year. What do you think of it now?
I have never seen a deck that did not get better when it was partnered with Jeska. There's just something about this card. And it's so innocuous when you first look at it. You're like, oh, okay, I guess that's kind of cool. And then you can kind of disseminate some of the information. Say, well, I guess you could maybe do X, Y, and Z with it. But every time that Jeska gets paired with a partner, suddenly you find a viable commander. Suddenly you find a viable pair. Like no one was talking about Ishai before.
Yeah.
And you put Jeska in there. And like you said, all of a sudden, Jeska Tymna, swing for, now you're hitting with Tymna for 6 with Jeska. Jeska Ishai, large bird, just one shot you. People are playing even Jeska Tevish. They're playing Jeska Tevish and doing a Rakdos kind of thing. And I have yet to see a partner that you pair with it where Jeska just doesn't get better. Like you can partner all kinds of different things out there and they're just kind of the same, but for some reason, this one just makes everything better. It is an infinite outlet in the command zone. So you generate infinite mana. You can cast Jeska repeatedly and just kill everyone and win the game. So that's really nice. It hoses your dorks. So you put out an early Jeska. 3 people put out dorks, no problem. I'll just destroy them all. There's like 3 for wanting, is pretty good. I think that's a really good trade that Jeska can do. And triple shotting, like my turn 1 Sarah Ascendant just became an 18-point swing. Like that's ridiculous, and I know not everyone's super high on Sarah Ascendant and stuff like that. And that's not what we're arguing right now. But like the fact that she just makes everything appear better is just so good. And we didn't really see that come to fruition when we did this last time. This was the very first one we ranked, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
We were like, let's dive in, Jeska. And I'm like, I don't even have anything to base it on. I don't have like a baseline or a yardstick. And so I kind of threw in the sea because people really hadn't seen everything that Jeska could really do. And we've seen it now. And people are partnering Jeska with everything. Jeska Ishai, Jeska, all the things I've said, even Jeska, all these other ones as well, making Jund commanders and all these other things. And it's just doing such good work in our format in a seemingly innocuous way. Like Pongo had said, having a outlet in the command zone is really nice. And having removal in the command zone, I think, is kind of underrated. We don't have like a lot of these, commanders can, Jeska can triple shot a lot of the 1-drops. And, if you cast one commander first and then Jeska second, now you're hitting everything that has a 2 power. A 2 toughness. So that's really good too. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough. Because I could really talk about this card all day. It's one of my favorite partners nowadays. It's just because you partner and it just does such good work. Anyway, so I'm going to give Jeska an A. She's very, very good in my opinion.
Pongo, you gave it a D last time.
I agree again with a lot of what Ryan has said. Not surprisingly. I quite high on Jeska. I think that you raised all the really good points about her being an infinite mana outlet, as well as I think something that is kind of overlooked occasionally that you were right to point out, which is the fact that the removal in the command zone can be quite powerful a lot of the time. And I think people often underestimate that. It's very valuable, to pick off potentially some hate bears. Sometimes it can just be an incredible tempo play to kill a few mana dorks. As a Najeela player, when I'm playing against Jeska, a lot of the time I'm already kind of just like, I know that in my head that I'm not really on the Najeela plan. I'm like kind of like from the start of the game. I don't necessarily make it a priority to have like a fast Najeela. I know that I'm probably going to go for more of a value-based win or like an Ad Nauseam or a Thassa's Oracle win. So she exerts a lot of pressure. And I do think that makes her really, really powerful. I think, however, one place where, she occasionally suffers is with like some of the partners that she routinely gets partnered with. I think sometimes some of those partnerships, she is pulling more weight. I think, with Ishai, it's a good example where like Ishai plus Jeska is kind of absurd, but then like Ishai plus other commanders, a little less absurd, sometimes underwhelming even. If you partner Jeska with like a blue-black partner, that's probably, that's not a particularly compelling way to go about doing Grixis. And like, I'm not super sold on Jund Jeska either because, the black-green options are not spectacular for the most part. She really shines in the Mardu shell, where, obviously being partnered with Tymna is, we're going to get into that, and I'm not going to, not going to spoil it too much at this point, but, Mad Farm is certainly a great deck, and I think that Jeska is an enormous upgrade for that deck. Do I think she's an A tier commander? That I'm not so sure about. I think I'm putting her in the B tier. She does bring a lot to the table, that's for sure. I just think that she leaves a little to be desired in terms of some of her color pairings.
So you think she's what, A tier, you said?
B. I would, if we were doing like in between ratings, she would be between a B and an A for me. So she's like a high B for me.
Okay.
And I think that, I'm not going to get into it too much, but because we're going to talk about Tymna immediately after this commander.
Mm-hmm.
But when you partner her with Tymna, then you end up with an insanely powerful deck. But, for reasons that we'll touch upon later, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think Jeska's an S tier commander, personally. I think the advantage Jeska gives you in the command zone is insane. It's easy to cast. It comes down. It immediately has an impact on the game. And kind of to Ryan's point, I haven't really seen it go into a pairing and be wrong. And I kind of disagree with you. I think Jeska makes really good sense in Grixis shells, and I think it makes really good sense in what's the word? Jund shells.
Jund.
And the reason I think that is because it simplifies the game plan significantly, right? So let me give you a good example. Outside of Kess in Grixis in Anala, your win con is some ad nauseum. We're going to chain together a bunch of spells, blah, blah, blah. If you put Jeska in there, it's okay. I have to generate infinite mana and then I can win the game. Same sort of thing where if you look at Jeska Ikra versus Corvold, you kind of are running into that same thing where Corvold has this very kind of, I have the win con sort of in the command zone, but I still have to try and like steal something from somebody else's deck or like cobble together a win. Whereas with this, it's just make infinite mana, win the game. And I think that distillation of the game plan in those shells is really good. With that being said, I think at Grixis, I wouldn't want to do it personally, mostly because I think Grixis can just play Thassa's Oracle and Adnaz in Kess and be just fine. I don't think you need it in Grixis, but I do think in the other shells you do need that outlet. And so for me, that's plenty to put it in an S tier. Because
I guess for your infinite mana in Jund, you're doing like World Gorger loops. Do you think that?
They're doing that in Mad Farm.
Yeah, well, some decks are.
Dockside Curio.
Dockside Curio is another
World
option.
Gorger loops.
Do you? Yeah. I don't know that I value that higher than Corvold personally. And I think that if you're talking about ways to win in Jund, just having, your Underworld Breach loops, through a grinding station, your various other outlets that you have like in Corvold, like those tend to be, in my mind, like just as good, kind of just as compact, to the point where it's like I would rather be playing Corvold, I think, than just having Jeska as an outlet and not really having a great like black-green partner. That's just my opinion on the matter. I think
Ikra's fine. I think Ikra gets a bad rap, but that's a different subject altogether.
I just think most of the time in those colors, like you're just going for Naz anyway, and like that's your outlet and like assembling the win from there is more or less trivial for those decks.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the ability for any deck that wants a clear game plan in the command zone, partnering it with Jeska regardless of the pair is really strong and makes the deck I think very good.
I would like rather play Dargo in a lot of situations where like Jeska could be the pick. If I was trying to do like not
guess who gets better with Dargo? Jeska.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
But
Jeska
but
just
like
makes
Jund,
every
you could
partner
play
better.
Jund Dargo, right? Like, and I think personally, I would prefer to play Jund Dargo over Jeska just because it's the more explosive deck.
I like Jeska more for the opposite reason, because I don't like the explosiveness of Dargo because it just feels so all in. And
but Jeska's
I feel
disruptive. Like she's not progressing your game plan. That's her value, is that she's a couple of pyroclasms in the command zone, and that's not nothing. You know, it was enough that I brought it up, but I don't think it's proactively pushing you towards your game plan. And in Jund, I think that's what you want to be doing.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But anyway, we could go around on that. Yeah. I still think it's an S tier commander, regardless.
I think, you know, if I was, you know, I'm being a little unfair, perhaps, because there's like other commanders that I've rated based on like what I feel are their like strongest pairing. And if I was rating her based on her strongest pairing, she would be higher. And so maybe I should put her in an A tier just because of that.
I was going to say, I was like, do you really think Rograkh is better than Jeska?
Well, I think that like there's more Rograkh decks potentially that I'm interested in playing than Jeska decks.
Well, that wasn't the question.
Yeah.
Right? There are more Lavinia decks that I'm interested in playing than Najeela decks.
Sure.
But that doesn't make Lavinia better, right? Like,
sure. I think that if I'm being consistent and I'm rating her based on what I think her best partner pairing is, I'll give her an A. We'll put it like that.
Okay. AAS. On to our next commander. This is one last year we all gave S's to, and I don't really expect that to change.
Shows what you know.
It's Tymna the Weaver. Ryan, you gave it an S last year. What are you thinking?
I'm not sure if anybody else knows this stat, but I am pretty sure that Tymna is the single most used partner on the decklist database.
That math tracks to me.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it does. And I'm pretty sure Jeska's up there too, but we already talked about Jeska. But like, there's a reason that she's the most used partner. I mean, when you distill all of its pieces down to why you're using Tymna, if you like, we could talk about semantics and this, that, the other, and conditions and board states and blah, blah, blah all day long. The reason why everyone uses Tymna: pay 1 life, draw 3 cards. There's nothing else in Magic that does that. Oh, but you have to connect, you have to do this, and you get technically gain life, then pay 3 life, blah, 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 blah. That's what you're doing, is you're paying 1 life and you're drawing 3 cards.
You're paying 3 life and drawing 3 cards. Oh, I guess because you gain 2 life. Yeah.
You gain 2, right. Then you pay 3.
You're effectively
paying 1 life.
Yeah. That's why I'm saying you pay 1 life, you draw 3 cards. That is why Tymna is so absolutely, and there's, I just don't know what to say that hasn't probably already been said about Tymna already to death. And I'm sure you guys can also articulate more on this. I really don't need waste extra time on her. She's an S tier commander in my book. I think she might be the S tier commander in my book. Mm-hmm. So I give her an S. So
Yep. I'm not going to waste too much time, and I'm not going to let us dwell on that too much either.
Tymna's good.
Not only is Tymna an S tier commander, I think there's a case that could be made that she's the best commander in the format currently.
I would probably agree with that.
Yeah.
I know that we could probably dig into minutia that would let us talk about that for 4 or 5 hours. But I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, I would agree with you.
Yeah. And obviously we're talking about like Tymna partnered with another commander, but like it's pointless to talk about Tymna, like just Tymna in a vacuum, because you're always going to partner her. So like whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. So on to the next one. One of the more prolific and premier Tymna partners is Kraum Ludevic's Opus. Last year, we all gave Kraum an A. Ryan, is that changing for you this year?
So the printing of Jeweled Lotus made Kraum really great. I think a lot of people were down on Kraum for years, which I think is really hilarious because not too much changed with Kraum. Yeah, Jeweled Lotus got printed. but
I don't think Jeweled Lotus really pushed it over the edge.
Exactly. Jeweled Lotus didn't push it over the edge. Kraum was always good. He was just slept on for a very long time. Everyone was on the Tymna Thrasios train for forever. And so you're like, Tymna Kraum, why wouldn't you just play Thrasios? Well, seeing as I can do nothing and draw a card or pay 4 and draw a card, I think I might just want to do nothing and draw a card. And so I think that Kraum has always been good. And we could get into, like I said, semantics like Tymna and stuff. He has haste. He costs more, but he only costs 5. And when I talked about Kodama last week, we talked about the difference between 5 and 6 being landing a turn 1 commander being incredibly immense. And this one is in 5. So it's not hard to land a turn 1 Kraum and then recover because people are casting 1 to 2 spells and you're drawing more cards because of Kraum. So you're not dumping all in and then just being out of luck because you're maybe playing something like Kodama. Kraum can get you back into the game. And by the way, you have a 4/4 blocker that blocks, Tymna attackers. You can turn sideways and attack an Adnos player. There's a ton of stuff you can do with Kraum. I think that Kraum probably moves up into S to me, actually. Really good colors, really good partner, does a lot of what we want to do, especially in our Turbo Nas meta. I think he moves up to S for me.
Pongo, what do you think?
I think previously, if I was rating this with a slightly different methodology, I might have rated it a little bit lower than I'm going to rate it. I will say straight up, it's an S tier. However, again, the methodology I'm using this time around, other than like pure memeing or whatever, is that this is speaking about Kraum with what I feel is his best partner combination. I think that Kraum plus Tymna is indisputably an S tier combination. I think that Kraum plus like Ikra is noticeably worse. And I say that having played it at the MLC. And I think that actually speaks to the fact that Kraum on his own is not as powerful of a card as like a lot of people make him out to be. I think that the card advantage he provides can be inconsistent occasionally. 5 mana is pretty steep in a lot of situations. And again, then there will also be situations where he just cannot provide you card advantage because of like a rule of law or something in play. He's a beefy boy. I think, even with all that being said, he would always be an A tier. And I think if we were talking about specifically like Kraum, Ikra, that's an A tier deck for me. It's without a doubt for me worse than Kraum Tymna. And the reason why is because I think Tymna is, of the two, still the partner who carries the most weight. But in addition to that, I think Kraum and Tymna synergize with one another extremely well. Kraum just being a hasty, super valuable point. He has haste, evasive beater to draw an extra card with Tymna with is just inherent synergy in your command zone. You're getting access now to red with Tymna. And, the reason why Kraum Tymna was a worse partner pairing than Tymna Thrasios for a long time was that red didn't really pull its weight as a color. That's not true anymore. You could make a case that there was a period of time where we had good red cards and Flash was still legal. That, Tymna Kraum should have been rated higher, right? But obviously before those red cards were printed, I think that it's much, much harder to make that case. So I think that Kraum, people occasionally overrate how good he is sort of on his own, but the synergy between him and Tymna makes him an S when they are together. And Tymna is an S tier commander for me all on her own. So the combination of the two, gives you one of the sort of strongest command zones you could ask for in the game.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. For me, however, I'm going to keep it an A tier.
Go ahead.
Gotta be honest. the reasoning for this is I think Kraum. So everybody's like, oh, I draw so many cards out of it. Yes, in your only ad nos meta. Take it into a mid-range meta, and suddenly you're not drawing as many cards. Right. And that is one of the things where I think a lot of the people who are very vocal in our community play in heavy ad nos metas. And because of this, the perception of the meta is ad nos is the meta, right? Mm-hmm. And so the perception becomes, oh, well, then Kraum's going to draw you all these cards, and Kraum can do this and Kraum can do that. And it's like, well, hold on. Let's back this up really quickly. You sit down against a mid-range deck that is fine with going land, dork, pass, and just sitting there and, was sandbagging for days. You're suddenly not drawing any cards. I do agree with Pongo. I think Tymna and Kraum as a pair are S tier. I don't think Kraum, any other situation, is S tier. In fact, I actually think it's only gets semi close to it when it's with Tevesh. And I actually think Tevesh does most of the heavy lifting there.
So to be clear, you're differing in your methodology from me.
Yeah,
you're looking at Kraum more in a vacuum than I am.
I try to look at it more holistically,
right? Which is fair, right? I think as long as we're clear about what our respective methodologies are.
Yeah.
I also think that there is an argument to be said that you're creating a pseudo rule of law effect under that argument. You're saying, well, I'm sandbagging because I don't want to feed the Kraum. Well, the Kraum gets to push ahead while you're trying.
Do they get to push ahead? I'm sorry. I don't know that I agree with that.
Depends on the turn it comes down. Depends on what it's partnered with. Depends on a lot of variety of factors. But once again, that could be said about a lot of the things we've done tonight.
I think Kraum gets fed even in mid-range metas, though.
Exactly.
It's easier for them to play around.
I don't know of a meta that's perfectly content with saying land, dork, pass, and thinks they're winning that game when someone else is going land, dork, lotus petal, doing a bunch of other stuff.
My point more is that when it's not paired with Tymna, it draws into not ad nos only. It draws noticeably less cards. And that's kind of my point. And I do think that how much Kraum gets played is reason enough for people to start going, hey, maybe I should play Rule of Law more. Like, Rule of Law in our meta is very, very well positioned right now. And Kraum exemplifies why so well. And if you're playing decks like Thrasios, if you're playing decks like Kenrith, or you're playing decks like Winota that can really do a good job of taking advantage of those effects, you're in a good spot, in my opinion.
I actually agree with you here, Callahan. I think to your point, there are some very prominent mid-range decks that don't necessarily hate the idea of just playing one card per turn. And they're advancing their game plan regardless. If we look at Najeela is just plays one card per turn, plays land for turn, swings in, has everyone on a clock, doesn't need to feed Kraum.
Winota does that. Najeela does that.
Tymna Thrasios also content to just swing in, draw 3 cards, progress their game plan without necessarily and sculpt without necessarily having to feed Kraum too much.
Yeah, correct. And that's kind of my thought here. Is it just I would much rather be able to scry one, look at the top card of my library, and then potentially flip a land or draw a card with Thrasios than Kraum, personally.
I mean, in some game states, but I think that
I would say going into a blind meta, I would prefer Thrasios over Kraum.
I think in a blind meta, people are more greedy and potentially.
I was about to say in a blind meta, it's ad nos.
I think people are potentially more willing to feed Kraum in a blind meta.
Perhaps.
And you forget that we play with when they're playing, let's say, the decks that allow them to do so. Some very disciplined players. I think like Spleenface, for example, almost always plays decks that allow him to play in a very disciplined way. Sick obviously will like occasionally throw caution to the wind, or he will play a deck that doesn't really have the luxury of playing like along that axis. Like whether it's Codie or just Cole or something like that. These are decks that are not really looking to necessarily extend the game. So, that's obviously, to his credit, he's not going to play. He's not going to try to force that game plan to not feed Kraum. But like, I think you do to some extent have to consider like who you play with regularly, and consider that, I'm playing Najeela a lot of the time, and I think that represents a deck that is pretty content to not feed Kraum. Like I said, Morgan Spleenface is playing Thrasios Tymna, a good amount of the time, but also plays like, a good number of other decks that I think are pretty mid-rangey and also pretty content to kind of like slow roll and generate value along some other axis or a little bit more slowly and not feed Kraum. Or, these are players who are just going to kill to Drake Kraum.
That too. That's a real thing.
So like,
they're like, that's fine. I'll just steal it.
I think that sometimes you have to consider factors like that.
Yeah. I don't know. I think Kraum's ceiling is really high, and then its floor it just beats face, which isn't a bad floor, but
I was about to say that's still a pretty good floor.
I don't know. My point of putting it in A is I think there's a lot of hyperbole around Kraum and how great it is. And I think A is like a lot more realistic of where it is than S, personally. I'm still saying it's really good. I'm like,
I don't think anybody's arguing with you here. I think you're shouting out into the ether about everyone who's coming for your head is really what it is.
But anyhow, on to the last partner on our list is the aforementioned Thrasios. And this was one that, except for Pongo last year, Ryan and I both gave S to, and Pongo, in his little meme thing over there was giving it a B. Ryan, where do you sit with Thrasios now here in 2021?
So everyone has pushed Thrasios out of their Tymna. They've kicked him out of the house. Kraum is my new best friend. Nobody likes Thrasios anymore. Thrasios is 100% still an S tier. It's still a fantastic card.
Thanks, baby.
Low, great colors, infinite outlet in the command zone, mana ramp / card filtering / draw in the command zone. It's just that people just don't play mid-range decks anymore. It's still a great card and it is the premier mid-range commander. Tymna Thrasios is still great, but everyone, wants to play with the shiny new toys. Like I've said so many times, that he got pushed out, and he's still 100% an S tier commander to me.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's a reason that he sat on the throne for so many years of the number one partner or, number one partner pair in our meta, or I'm sorry, in our format.
Yeah. Pongo, what are your thoughts? Is it actually a B, or what's that you joking around?
That was obviously me joking around. So I agree with what Ryan said. Thrasios is an S tier commander. I think adding on to what Ryan said though, providing a little bit of my own personal insight, my own personal analysis. I think that if we're talking about Thrasios and like why a lot of people have kind of fallen out of love with Thrasios. A big part of it has to do, I think, with like the Paradox Scepter. Well, not Paradox anymore, but like the Thrasios, the Scepter Thrasios decks that are sort of like console decks, and like kind of just like worse ad nauseam decks kind of all rolled up into one. I think that niche for Thrasios he's been outcompeted in. Where Thrasios, I think, still has a niche that he can carve out where, he's very clearly an S tier commander, is obviously, you can still play him as a very powerful commander, albeit in my estimation, not an S tier commander, as like an infinite mana outlet for like dockside type stuff. But where his strength really lies, in my opinion, and what really pushes him into the S tier still, what keeps him there, is his ability to be played in sort of like the creature based like reanimator combo decks, or even sort of like the mid-rangey like mid-rangey oracle decks that get to play like Collector Oof and Null Rod type effects. I think that, you know, you have to build him to attack the metagame. You have to take advantage of the fact now that, you know, you can play him with those effects. And because you're playing Tymna, you can still extract value out of like Collector Oof and that type of effect, which is like an amazing bonus for like when you get to play hate bears like Collector Oof and stuff like that, to be able to use them as value pieces. So I do think that I have, you know, fallen out of love personally with like the PST style decks, or, you know, CST style decks, you know, Consult, Scepter, Thrasios. But I do think that like Razakat's still a very, very powerful deck. And I think
Rectorfit.
I think that, you know, some of the more like contemporary Consult decks where you get to play, you know, some powerful hate bears, and, you know, you get to dig into some of the powerful white cards, and, you know, the consistency that green gives you is also very powerful. You know, what Thrasios offers is, you know, he's not, in my estimation, the best like value engine in terms of like dumping, you know, the dumping mana into him axis. But he is a cheap body that, you know, you can play early, and then you can play your Tymna. That classic curve is, you know, provides a lot of consistency into a lot of different type of games and pod compositions. Gives you 2 cheap attackers that you can play off of basically just land drops and like 1 mana dork, such that you can kind of start grinding out value. And then also you have where you used to have very particular synergy with like Neoform into Hull Breacher. Now you can like Neoform Tymna into Notion Thief if you want to, and I think that that's still pretty powerful.
Or Academy Rector.
I'm just ignoring you, Callahan. you can also Neoform, or you can like Eldritch Evolution Thrasios, I guess, into like Notion Thief or whatever, or turn him into an opposition agent or something like that, with Neoform, I should say. And then, you know, in those decks, you can also play Seedborn Muse. I'm like not absurdly high on Seedborn Muse as a card these days, unless you're playing like a deck that can really slow down the game. You know, like there's too many instances where I've like legitimately just beaten 2 Thrasios players with Seedborn Muse, like grinding value each turn, or like come obscenely close and like only lost because of a misplay, where I'm just like just win the game. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's, you know, people can play around your value engine to some extent if they know what they're doing. And also I think that it's just kind of a little too slow these days if you're only really relying on counter magic as your disruption.
So what's your rating?
I said he's still an S tier.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Good deal. Yeah, I think it's S tier. I've been a Thrasios homer for, okay. So, I hate to burst this bubble for everybody. But I love Lavinia. Lavinia is one of my favorite commanders. Thrasios is actually my favorite commander. Like if we were to actually dig into it, and like of the decks that I enjoy playing, I love playing Thrasios based decks like all the time. It is so much fun. And you know, currently what I've been working on is a Thrasios Tymna Rector style deck that is very reminiscent of, you know, the old Flash Hulk decks. And honestly, I love being able to, and I've said this before, I like being able to play decks where it's just my whole deck is just good cards. And you don't have to play a whole lot of bad cards. And I feel like Thracios and Tymna really enables that. And I also feel like Thracios enables that in other partner pairings as well. I like Thracios and Bruce. I think that is still a really, really, really good deck. I think Thracios and Akiri still fine. I think Thracios and Tana is odd, but fine.
Thrasios Vile Smasher.
Yeah, the list goes on. I think Thrasios Jeska is very interesting.
Thrasios Rograkh.
Yeah.
Divergent Transformations deck.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a lot of I could keep going on that list, and it's all enabled by Thrasios. And like I don't think people really, this is the thing that I was trying to hammer home about earlier, is I don't think people truly have a true appreciation for how truly strong 4 generic scry 1, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it on the top, otherwise draw a card is. That is bananas. Like it is an outlet. Regardless of what Kraum does and the incremental value, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it's better in incremental value. I will give you that. Thrasios is an outlet. Automatically better, in my opinion. And Thrasios you're going to be hard pressed to convince me, one of the most like staunchly mid-range players out there, that there will be ever a better partner for mid-range than Thrasios. But I could probably talk about that all day. We did a whole episode on if Thrasios is still good or not.
Yeah. One thing I would add, because I did mention like the CST style decks, and Ryan did bring up Vile Smasher. I think that if I was going to build like the Scepter style deck, the sort of like ad nauseum kind of like fast mid-range deck, it would be in that partner pairing.
Yeah.
Like as good as Tymna is and as insane as Tymna is, this is a point that I keep kind of hammering home, which is, how much I value 1-card win conditions. And I think that is the Thrasios deck that best utilizes ad nauseum as a 1-card win condition to either assemble like breach lines or just, kind of being more explosively able to assemble Scepter like post ad nauseum. So I don't think that, you can't play that deck anymore. I just personally would be playing it in Sans White rather than Sans Red.
Well, and I think they're two different decks personally. I think like Paradox Scepter, Tymna Thrasios is a mid-range deck. Paradox, or I guess it's not Paradox Scepter, but CST. Yeah. CST is Tymna Thrasios is a mid-range deck, and CST with Thrasios Vile is a turbo deck. And I think that's solely off the back of one has white, one has red. And I think that really is all that needs to be said as far as that goes personally.
Yeah,
right?
But it's not like a turbo deck. It's kind of in between. Like it plays enough value engines and like consistency enablers like in Mana Dorks and stuff like that, where the Sans White Thrasios decks can still do like a relatively convincing mid-range game compared to
I'd
like
agree with
from Ikra, like in certain situations.
I think CST is considerably worse than Razakats, though, to be fair. I think that's to your point. Like, I think CST and Thrasios Vile is way closer to being good than, or way closer to Razakats is than CST is in Thrasios Tymna. But anyhow, I could prattle on about that all day. I love Thrasios.
I think we had this exact conversation in the Thrasios.
I think we did too.
Yeah.
So on to our last commander for the evening. This is the deck that won Tier 1 Con via our fellow Sculpty Boy and Into the North member Sick Robot Reed, is Codie Vociferous Codex. So Ryan, this wasn't out this time last year. What do you think about it? It looks pretty damn good.
So I had a chance to speak with Reed about this deck and what their thought processes were. They brought Into the North, went to Tier 1 Con, and there's 3 people from Into the North that brought it. So 3 separate people, and they didn't like collude on this. They didn't say, hey, what are we thinking? Should we all bring Codie? No, like each of them independently said, or at least this is what I was told, that they said, we think this is going to be the best for this tournament. So we have a podcast episode out on this where we interviewed him. And as I was speaking to him and kind of unraveling what he really thought about the deck, let's establish a couple of things. First of all, this is a really good deck. Okay. So it's very, very good. It's good in the fact that it can offer up consistent turn 2 and turn 3 wins with protection. So it's not going 110% in to win. It's going enough in to also protect itself. It has got 41 drop demonic tutors in it because of the way that Codie works. You cast a simple 1 drop after activating, you get Profane Tutor and go find your ad nauseum and win the game. That's 40 demonic tutors that are cost 1. So that's really, really good. And as you see them play this game, if you go catch any of the VODs or anything like that from Twitter, from Tier 1 Con, you can see just how good this deck can be. There's a couple of caveats that I want to put onto that. Number 1, this deck is a glass cannon, 100%. Like it's up there with, as far as choreographed, like what you're going to do, it's up there with Godot. I'm not saying in power level it's the same. I'm saying when you sit down at the table and they flip over their commander and you see Godot, you know exactly what they're doing. It's the exact same thing with Codie. There's no weird thing that they're going to do with Codie. They're going to go hit Profane Tutor and win the game with ad naus. That's what they're doing. So you know and see it a mile away. So if they run in and they cast Codie, you can cast one of your 10 million removal spells that can stop Codie. It dies to artifact removal. It dies to creature removal. It dies to activated abilities like Curse Totem. It dies to Stony Silence abilities. It dies to all of these things. And I'm not talking about the dies to removal argument being what shuts down the deck. I'm saying that it is in a unique position that a lot of hate stops it. A lot. Not just some hate. Like, someone cast a Null Rod and now all of a sudden my artifacts don't work. It's like, no, someone cast my any stacks piece almost, and it doesn't work anymore. So that's really tough with Codie. However, the resiliency, not the resiliency, that's the wrong word. The speed with protection backup that it has makes it really, really good. So there's all of this stuff that I spoke about Codie. And I think this is a really, really good one to end on, in my opinion, because Codie is not fun to play. It is not a fun deck.
That's subjective, right?
It is. It absolutely is. Reed put it super well when he said, Codie is the deck that you want to play if you want to play the least amount of cEDH in a night of cEDH. Because you're either winning on turn 2 or turn 3. So that means you're ending the game super early, or you got stopped and you can't rebuild. And it takes really, really long time where you're just basically saying, draw card, pass, because I can't do anything. And so he's the commander to play if you don't want to play as much cEDH as possible. You want to end as soon as possible. So Codie is not super fun to play. And once again, that's subjective. You're absolutely right. If you're big on winning really early, then Codie's your book. He's your book to read. But there's a reason that ad naus is such a prolific and a big part of our meta. Is because you feel like you're doing a lot of stuff. Like you said, it makes you feel like you're a real smart Magic player. And all this thing does is just turn sideways, find the tutor, get the ad naus, and then try and win as fast as possible. Whereas things like with Tymna Kraum or Tevish Kraum, you're grinding, you're in there, you're doing stuff, you're trying to win, you're fighting through things. You feel there's a lot going on. And Codie isn't really conducive to that. Codie is super powerful. But the reason that I said this was good to end on is that is not the only thing that we use to rank commanders in Commander. cEDH is EDH at the end of the day. There's a reason that there are what we are ranking as D, E, and F tier commanders that are making it onto the database, and people are playing them and brewing with them, even though they know going in that it is not the quote unquote best strategy that you can play, or the top strategy, or the best commander. They play it because they like it. They play it because they want to have fun. That's why we're playing this, and Codie doesn't lend itself to that too much. So with all of that in mind, and considering all that in there, Codie is good. But the fact that you're just trying to close out the game as fast as possible will actually lead people to artificially build the deck because they think it's super powerful, play it a few times, realize they're not having fun, and then take it apart. So I'm going to actually be a little bit weird here, and I'm going to give it a B.
Okay.
Because of that. I'm sure you guys, I don't know what you guys are thinking, but my instinct is telling me things like A and S because of how fast it is, but I'm going to give it a B because fun is very important in this format, and I think people overlook it sometimes. So that's where I sit.
Pongo, do you think it's better than B or worse than B?
Well, I'll certainly say that I'm not going to consider like anything beyond its effectiveness at winning the game within my rating. I don't think it's unfair to do so. To Ryan's point, I think, as long as you're clear about what your methodology is while you're, doing a tier list like this, it's all in good fun. You can rate things in different tiers for a wide variety of reasons and come to different conclusions based on personal feelings. We don't have the objective truth of, what commanders are, definitively in what tiers. And the very idea is in some sense nonsensical. But, what is this video about? It's, we're here to have fun. We're here to talk about a wide variety of commanders, give our honest opinions about, what makes them good, what makes, decks consistently able to win. What do we like in deck building? And, I think we've succeeded in what we set out to do in that respect. And, I hope all of you will agree with that. But you can feel free to disagree and let us know in the comments below, by all means. Just make sure you give the video a thumbs up when you do. All that being said, I think if we're returning to sort of my criteria, as I have been wont to do over the entire process of this, this 2-video series, let's look at the colors Codie offers. 5 colors. You can't get any better than that. We're not playing Gigantha in the command zone, so we have access to everything. Codie is 100% a combo enabler. There's no doubt about that. That is what he does.
No doubt.
So we can certainly say he's a combo enabler. He's enabling a great consistency in accessing your ad nauseum. Like I said before, tutoring can represent enabling a combo. But it can also, in certain cases, be value depending on sort of the axis upon which you're tutoring. I think Godot is a good example of that, where the tutoring is a means to an end as opposed to kind of like, an end that eventually gets you, or a means that eventually gets you to a certain end, I should say. And then if we talk about value, well, I mean, like Codie is not offering you like cards, obviously, and that's kind of where, as Ryan rightfully said, he struggles a lot. But he's not without value. And this might sound weird if you hadn't thought about it, but he is a mana dork at the end of the day. You're paying 3 mana to put him out, then you're going to pay 4 mana to activate his ability, and you're getting 5 mana back. So that is a small amount of value, but it is not nothing. So we do have to give that to Codie. And even though it's a relatively small amount of value, it's in some ways kind of precisely what you would want out of Codie or like in an ad nauseum deck, right? Like, what is Rograkh's strength? Rograkh's strength is that he gives you extra mana. Codie also gives you 1 extra mana towards your ad nauseum lines. So I think that the comparison with Rograkh is very apropos in a lot of ways. I think what you're getting over Rograkh is 2 extra colors, which is great. What you're losing is that turn 1, that kind of that percentage of turn 1 wins that you get out of Rograkh, which admittedly are a minority, but it is something. You're also, by my estimation, losing, and in my gold fishing, you're losing some amount of turn 2 potential, but certainly the deck has a good amount of turn 2 potential. And what are you gaining? You're gaining a lot. I think that in some respects, the advantage, you are gaining considerable card advantage, like Ryan said, by virtue of the fact that compared to other ad nauseum decks, Codie only really needs to mulligan for mana and protection, where other ad nauseum decks need to mulligan for mana, action, and ideally also protection. But in a lot of cases, they're not going to have protection. They're kind of just going to go for it naked, and that's kind of when they start to have a bad time, as many of us have probably witnessed in games. Codie, by comparison, has the option of, often going for it on turn 2 without protection, in my experience, occasionally with protection, pretty much always on turn 3 with protection. And sometimes multiple pieces of protection. And that's something that not a lot of decks can do as consistently in this format. I think Codie is possibly, the most consistent deck in the format, especially on an early time frame. And in addition, Codie can play all the efficient interaction, does play all the efficient interaction. And kind of just does that every time. Whereas like a lot of the other, we say consistent turn 3 commanders, a lot of them are more like turn 3.5 commanders. If we're looking at things like Gitrog, they do win on turn 3, a good amount of the time, but like Codie is like 2.5, like seriously 2.5. So like a turn faster, and always doing that. And I think that's, to your point, Ryan, that it's not necessarily always fun because there is that certain degree of linearity to it. But as I've talked about, I think multiple times over this series, with that linearity comes a great deal of power in any cEDH deck. Consistency is king. And ultimately, if you're playing a deck that is both fast and consistent and able to protect itself, you've got all the elements required to be an S tier deck, and Codie certainly is an S tier deck.
Interesting. I'll tell you what, I'll split the difference. I think I tend to agree with Ryan a little bit more on this. In regards to the fact that it just gets shut down by a lot of hate. And I kind of use this metric. We've all kind of accepted that, Lavinia is, an average to below average deck, right? Codie is a deck that if Lavinia comes out before or after it, it doesn't really matter. It just goes, well, I guess I can't beat that. And that to me is a problem. And I can't very well in good faith put that into S tier personally. And I get all the things you're saying. But it just, to me, if I play one card and that, like, specifically that in a deck that, is weak around it and is pretty good at protecting it, and you can't manage to get around that very well. I've just never played against Codie and it beat Lavinia, ever. And then like in my local meta, I've played against it multiple times, and it just goes, oh, well, okay, I guess I can't play the game. And so one time that was my fault because I just played really smart. I was going third, and there was Codie deck going first. Second, there was Phoenix on the Gila, and third was me on Lavinia, and fourth was, I believe, either like a Golos Nozduk or a Codie deck. I can't remember. But I had a Gemstone Cavern, and on the Codie player's upkeep, I go, stop on your upkeep. I'm going to silence on your upkeep. And I shift the turn order. And that's something that Codie can't deal with. And I can't give it an S. I can give it an A because it's explosive as hell and it's really fast and it's won some tournaments. But I think that it's a deck that does specifically well into these uninteractive ad nos metas. And I think when it gets into more interactive metas, the deck you see the cracks in the deck and you see where its weaknesses are. I think that's a little bit too much to overcome.
Like in your example, I think like it has a very clear answer to silence where it can just counter silence, right? And the deck probably plays more efficient interaction, especially than Lavinia does. Not only that, but like all of the cards that you're playing to kind of remove your Codie eventually when you're going off with ad nauseum can double as removal for hate pieces that you would play. So it's not dead in the water to any of those, right? Like the deck is literally just mana and interaction because it doesn't need to play all of the wheels, like all of the payoffs. Like the whole thing is just in the command zone. And you can have the hate for it, right? Like that's certainly possible. Like, and sometimes the deck will lose to that, and that's true for every deck, right? Well, and that's true for every ad nauseum deck. But like, I don't know that is like a good and objective metric to put it in a tier on.
Well, my point is that it's kind of like stack decks, right? Like where stack decks are better in pairs. And I feel like Codie is better when there's more than one Nas deck at the table. And I just can't, I've never seen it be good against a table that was more diverse than just ad nos and not played by like specifically Reed.
Right. I mean,
you know what I mean? So I'm trying not to judge it based on my experience with playing against it on team turn 3. I'm judging it on my experience outside of that.
I mean,
and outside of that, I've seen it get shut down so easy.
Semifinals with that deck, right?
Yeah, but again, we're talking about two of the best players I know, right? Like,
yeah,
I'm trying to judge it based off of the average player. And I would say, in my experience, the average player, I've seen it just get hosed more than I've seen it do well.
Sure. But I would think that, if we're trying to rate these decks sort of like based on their own merits, we shouldn't necessarily consider the pilot of that deck so much, which is kind of the same thing that we did with like Heliod, right? But sort of in reverse.
But that's what I'm doing, right? Like, because what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's what Callahan is doing. He's saying, with Reed and Morgan playing these, it actually bumps it up, not down.
When they're playing it,
I think Heliod would be higher than your E rating, like otherwise.
When Charles absolutely in their hands, it can hold its own.
Yes, well, hold its own is strong. But, but we're not talking about Heliod right now. We're talking about Codie.
I don't know. I just think that, I don't know.
I'm giving it an A. Like,
I'm not sure that I agree with the notion that like you should evaluate it in the hands of like a particular player, like any particular.
No, but we established this in the last episode though, where I was talking that I don't want to evaluate things based on how the best players play these things. And my point is that outside of the hands of the best players, I have not seen it be better or good or better than any other Adnos deck.
Well, I mean, because with all respect to the person you played against, they might not even be an average player for all I know, right? So like, why are we arbitrarily?
This isn't the only
them,
example.
Right?
This is one example of many. Like, I played against plenty of it, whether it's on Founders, whether it's, wherever. I'm not using this one example for my whole basis.
Mm-hmm.
This is just an example to like that. I'm not using like purely what's the word I'm looking for? Like circumstantial. That's not the right word, but I think you know what I'm going for.
Anecdotal.
I mean, I'm not using totally anecdotal evidence.
Ultimately,
here.
it is totally anecdotal evidence, right? Because the plural of anecdote is not data, and it's not an objective criteria.
I mean, I guess I just when you pair this thing up with more than one or deck that is not a Nas deck, I don't believe that it is well positioned to succeed in that pod. Now, and I stand by this. I think that it is a meta dependent deck that excels in heavy Adnos formats because of the fact that it is able to capitalize on the fact that everybody's kind of playing greedy in those types of environments. And I'm not saying it's not great, right?
Yeah, A is still a really good rate.
Like it's
super
absolutely
good.
Great. But I don't know that it's S tier great. I think that its weaknesses make it very, very much an A. Like I don't know that I can.
Do you think it's better than Rograkh?
I would say it's better than Rograkh.
Well, you gave Rograkh an A, for example.
Yeah.
And so you don't think it's a whole tier better. So you would say that it's.
I don't think it's a whole tier better.
You think it's like an A plus.
Yeah, like it. So how I would rank it is if I were to choose which Turbo Nas deck I was asked to play, if I had to decide between Rograkh or Codie, I would pick Codie because I think Codie's a bit more able to recover than Rograkh Silas is. Because we established this earlier, right? Like Rog Silas just can't recover. It takes him forever. Where like Codie plays enough interaction in it that it can at least try, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know.
It still struggles to recover, but I get what you're saying.
Like it can at least attempt to stop other win attempts, where Rograkh Silas is so greedy that there's, like I said, it's kidding itself by playing blue, saying, "Whoa, we play blue for interaction." It doesn't play hardly any interaction.
Right.
Yeah. It plays things like 3 spells to interact on the stack, basically.
Right. Well, I think Codie is just much stronger at fighting the disruption people would play to stop it, and also much stronger at fighting against counter magic. And, by saying much in both of those categories, in addition to having access to 2 more colors, I don't know. I just don't know what else it would take for it to be an S tier. But in any case, I don't know that it there's much value in continuing to talk about it.
I don't know. I'm not saying it's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad.
It didn't even make it into A. For me.
Why am I the one
it didn't even make it into A.
Well, I mean, I assume I didn't talk you into an A. So yeah.
No. But I mean, also, and it's like you said, it's perfectly okay to judge based upon the criteria that we deem to be important criteria. Yeah. Like I like your criteria, Pongo, because you are looking at it from a very analytical and objective standpoint. I think it's good to have that in there. And I'm taking it a little bit more from the boots on the ground. Sometimes, I can't think of a good analogy.
Yeah, but I get where you're coming from. And I think that's fine.
You're in the trenches. Sometimes it doesn't always work out, even though all the objective stuff is there. And I think it's good to have these different opinions because we have so many different cEDH players.
My point is,
we have the ones that subscribe to me. We have the ones that subscribe to you. We have the ones that subscribe to Cal. And I think that that's really cool that we have this across the spectrum.
My point is, I understand your criteria And so, but I don't.
You just think I'm wrong.
I don't fully understand.
I already know the
Callahan,
completion of
right?
the sentence. He's like, I don't understand.
But no, I mean, I was finishing the sentence. Like, it's true. Like, because I'm not sure that I see how Callahan can give certain other decks an A, while and then while acknowledging all the things that Codie has over those decks, still only gives it an A. But if it's like a higher A than those decks, I think that's acceptable.
I mean, it's very close to S for me. It's just so any glass cannon deck, it makes me really uncomfortable giving it an S.
That's
and it makes it like, to me, because for an S deck, man, that deck can win through everything. And I feel like most of the S decks that I put on here, I feel like can win through pretty much everything. And like
ranking it next to Najeela, for example, if I remove your Najeela, you're like, whoopity do. I'll just recast Najeela or just go on my plan B or whatever. Codie doesn't have
you could recast Codie.
Codie's like, oh, you removed my commander? Well, great.
You just recast Codie, the same thing, right? Like,
not quite, depending on what you did and when they interacted with you. But like, what I'm trying to say is that there's only so many rankings that we could give. That's why we keep, throughout all this, we keep saying, well, it's a high S or it's a low B or whatever. It's because we know that it's not just these light switches that we're just flipping. We know that there's some grays in between them. And that's why it can be hard, because I look at Krark from last week and I'm like, what was I thinking giving it a B? Because I'm looking at some of the other B level commanders. I'm like, I don't know if Krark's as good as Urza, but here we are. And that's because maybe I would give Krark a really, really low B, whereas I give Urza a really, really high B. So anyway.
Yeah.
Sure. And I acknowledge that.
Do you hate me, Pongo?
I can never hate you.
Oh my goodness.
I can hate some of the sports teams you like, but like that's a totally different.
Oh, shut up. Ohio State's up 31-21. Let me enjoy my
It's
time.
okay. I don't actually hate those sports teams you like either.
I was gonna say, like, you don't even give a shit about like football, don't you?
Yeah, certainly not American football. Yeah,
American football. Well, that about wraps things up for us here today. Ryan is joining us over from Playing with Power. And Ryan, for those at home who are unaware of who you are and your channel, where can they find you at?
Sure. So you can find Playing with Power on YouTube primarily. That is our main platform where we post all of our content. We are also hosting a podcast. You can find those on most of your podcast aggregators as well. So check us out there.
Yeah, awesome. Well, for us here, you can find us over on Twitter at SculptyBoys, BOIS on Twitter, or you can find a direct link in our link tree in the description below. Also want to give an extra shout out and extra thanks to all of our patrons who help keep the lights on. If you too would like to become a patron, you can head on over to patreon.com/themindsculptors or check out the link in the description. Thanks again for joining us, Ryan, and thanks to all of you for tuning in for this. Looks like it's going to be a 4-hour one. Yippee.
And let us know in the comments what you think of Codie. Do you agree with me or do you agree with Callahan?
Or do you agree with Ryan?
I agree with Ryan.
Yeah, who do you agree with there? So, but with that being said, from all of us here at the Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.
I'm in line with the stars, I'm in sync with the earth. 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'ma ride for the squad, let up ties in the hearse. I've been on a vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I'm never so packed for the stack, never lied on the rap. Got a bag from the way that I write it. Queen looking Tyson, do that ass survive, doing 80 to the house. Then I hit it to the sky, change haters on a tirade. Talking to their crib in the face, be still, let that hate stuff fade. We all want the same, we all want a meal in the safe. I wanna live like I'm trying to reach enlightenment. Trail spill from my lips, feel big from the bib. Take a sip till I pass out. Try and get grit, but it don't make sense. Cause you can lose life on this fast route. Yeah, turn thoughts to a cash cow. I might flip that to the glass house. I don't need the accolades, I'm in love with the chase. I just wanna eat, save a spot at the table. Beast with the slap in my myself on the map. You long with the wind, but we knowing that it's cap. 5-hour flights, couple nights at the flat. To be real, couldn't see me making moves while I'm at. I'm still on the grind, limit time when I chat. I'm burning down sage, keep the demons away. When I write it, give a piece of myself to the page. I don't do it for the